Hey everyone, we are Group 1, Sunny, Aditya, Nabil, Arman, and Sanvi. Today we are diving into a final report on Gap. We've analyzed everything from internal to external to the current market struggles to their strengths and weaknesses. And we're here to walk you through the strategic path Gap needs to take to stay competitive in the evolving retail world. Let's get into it. I'll pass it on to Arman.
Gap Inc. was founded in 1969 by Doris and Don Fisher in San Francisco, and since then it has grown into a well-known realtor in the clothing industry. The company sells clothing, accessories, and personal care products, serving a wide target market that includes men, women, children, and even infants. In terms of its purpose, Gap's mission is to be a leader in family clothing by offering quality products at a fair price. Its vision goes beyond sales, focusing on creating a positive impact across all stakeholder communities. Next slide. Gap also has a strong global retail presence, operating in more than 3,200 stores across major international markets. The company also has a multi brand portfolio with well known names like Gap, Old Navy, Banana Republic, and Thea and Intermix. In terms of the store mix, Gap makes up 41% of stores, Old Navy makes up 33%, and Banana Republic makes up 20%, which shows where like most of the company's retail focus sits. Gap also uses an integrated retail model design and selling mostly private labeled products through both physical and online channels. Next slide. Gap has a major global presence, as mentioned, with 3,200 stores worldwide. In 2017, about 2,663 of these stores were located in North America, which shows how heavily the company still depends on that region. At the same time, Gap has been expanding its brand presence into the Pacific, and European markets to reach more international customers. The company has also publicly listed on the New York Stock Exchange, which reflects its position as a large and established global retailer. Next slide. Looking at Gap's finances, the company has faced some ups and downs over the years. In 2015, total net sales were 15.8 billion, which was a drop of 638 million from the year before. In 2016, the net income also fell by more than 26%, mainly because of operating expenses increased. And when we compare brand performance, Old Navy clearly stands out as the strongest, with sales rising 6% in 2017, while the Gap and Banana Republic continued to decline. And more recently, Old Navy generated the highest sales, and Gap also carried 1.49 billion in a long-term debt by January 2025. Next slide. Gap's current issues mainly come down to strategy and changing market conditions. The company is still trying to figure out where its future growth will come from, especially since not all of its brands are performing well. And on top of that, the shopping habits are shifting online. While competitors like Zara and H&M are growing their e-commerce presence, Gap also depends heavily on North America, with over 83% of its stores located there. And finally, Old Navy's closure in Japan shows its success in one market does not always carry over to another, which also makes international growth more challenging for Gap. And now I'll hand it off to Sunny.
So right now we're going to do the internal analysis, meaning the analysis of Gap itself, not anything outside of Gap. So first off, we're going to cover the organizational structure of Gap. Gap has sort of what we call a hybrid divisional organizational structure. There's one guy on top and then a bunch of different officers like CEOs, and each little brand and department of Gap has its own leader there. Arthur Peck was the CEO of Gap from 2015 to 2019. Gap divides by brand and region. And Gap's brands, they operate with a lot of autonomy, but even though they're independent, they have converging strategic goals. Value chain analysis. Now, Gap, even though it's an American company and most of its stores are in North America, 80% of the clothes they sell are imported from overseas. Right now, because of nearshoring for political reasons, they're moving operations from Asia to Latin America, but still most of the product is from Asia, Vietnam and China specifically. So Gap has made a commitment to use ethically obtained, sustainably sourced materials. That means respecting both the workers and the environment. And climate trends indirectly affect Gap's ability to source raw materials. Cotton, leather, all these things, the environment affects the prices of all these different commodities used in textiles and fashion. And another thing, Gap does not own most of its manufacturing facilities. It gives these out to contractors. Outbound logistics. Right now, Gap is implementing incremental value chain innovation, which means making small little improvements in all kinds of different areas of the value process. Gap uses just-in-time inventory, so they buy just what they need for a short amount of time. Minimalist inventory. You don't buy a huge amount, but you don't buy too little. Just the right amount of inventory for a certain, say, 1 month of sales, let's say. And now, yeah, by using contractors, this helps Gap have a very flexible supply chain. Some goals for Gap. In 2018, they want to open 25 new stores. They're building more stores for Old Navy and Athleta, which are doing more well. And they're closing the underactive locations for Gap and Banana Republic. Now I'm passing on to Sandy.
Perfect. So now I'll actually be discussing about the external analysis as to what are the external factors that are affecting Gap. So the next slide, please. Perfect. So Gap Inc. operates in a very dynamic and competitive global retail environment. Its performance is influenced by several external factors like changing consumer preferences, economic conditions, and advancements in technology. To better understand these forces, we apply two frameworks: Pestle analysis to examine macro-environmental factors, and Porter's 5 forces to analyze industry competition. Now the next slide. Yeah. So now talking about the political factors, Gap operates globally and sources from over 40 countries, making it vulnerable to tariffs, trade restrictions, and labor regulations. Economically, the apparel industry has very low profit margins and is highly sensitive to economic conditions. During downturns, consumers shift to cheaper alternatives, forcing Gap to constantly adjust pricing and positioning. Moving forward, the next slide. Socially, consumer preferences and fashion change very quickly, making demand forecasting difficult. There's also a strong shift towards sustainability and ethical sourcing. Technologically, e-commerce has transformed retail. Customers now expect seamless online and offline experiences, forcing Gap to invest heavily in digital transformation. Moving forward, for the environmental concerns, they are increasingly important in the fashion industry, especially regarding water usage and waste. Gap has actually taken steps towards sustainability but must continue improving. Talking about the legal factors, the company must comply with global labor and environmental laws. Any failure in ethical sourcing could lead to serious reputational and financial consequences. Moving forward, to understand Gap's competitive position, we used Porter's 5 forces. Overall, the industry is highly competitive with strong pressure from buyers and substitutes, making it difficult for companies like Gap to maintain profitability and customer loyalty. Moving forward, competition, if we talk about it, in the apparel industry is extremely intense. With over 20,000 competitors, brands like Zara and H&M compete on fast fashion and pricing, while entry barriers have reduced due to e-commerce. Building brand recognition and achieving economies of small scale still remain significant challenges. Moving forward, competition in the apparel industry is extremely intense with over 20,000 competitors. Customers today have many alternatives, including resale platforms and discount retailers, increasing substitution threat. Supplier power is moderate since Gap works with many suppliers, but risks still exist due to global dependency. Buyer power is high, I'd say, because customers can easily switch brands, forcing Gap to constantly compete on value and pricing. Now I'd actually be passing it over to Sunny to discuss about the SWOT analysis.
Sorry, SWOT analysis, we're going to do strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. Now, strengths. So, as we mentioned, Gap's hybrid organizational structure allows for flexible supply chain and operational changes without compromising quality or overspending. As we've mentioned, Gap has a strong presence in North America. Gap appeals to a wide range of customers, and Gap has a very large and diverse workforce. Now, weaknesses. Gap has very high employee turnover. For the past 10 years, they've been losing employees. 2016, they had about 141,000 employees. And now in 2025, they had 82,000, almost half that number, or just a bit over half that number. And some of the reasons for this high turnover is low wages, burnout, employee burnout, and then frequent company restructuring. This is discouraging employees from staying. Now, passing it back to Sanvi for a bit.
Perfect. So now if I were to talk about the opportunities, Gap has several opportunities to grow. The expansion of e-commerce allows it to reach a wider audience. Emerging markets like Asia and Mexico offer new growth potential. Sustainability initiatives can improve brand image, and the growing demand for activewear provides strong potential through its Athleta brand. Now talking about the threats, the next slide. So Gap is now dealing with a number of external dangers. Pricing and margins are under pressure from fierce competition from fast fashion companies as well as traditional retailers. Sales are impacted by the transition to internet shopping, which decreases foot traffic in physical establishments. The risk of unsold inventory is increased by rapidly evolving fashion trends. In addition, low industrial profit margins and growing labor and manufacturing expenses lead to persistent financial strain. Now, I'd actually be passing it over to Sunny again to dig into it deeper.
We're going to do an AQCD analysis. So first is the actionable part, actionable solutions for Gap. Gap has to expand its digital presence and its omni-channel services because customers expect convenience. They want to have many ways of buying the product. Now, one problem that we're going to discuss a bit later is that because of the growth of e-commerce, Gap doesn't know the Gap's bricks and mortar locations might become irrelevant. One thing they can do is implement the BOPIS model, the buy online, pick up in store. So that way you're kind of using both e-commerce and the physical stores. Automation, so you can automate the distribution centers, customer service, and even the checkout. That'll help reduce some operational costs. Implementing nearshoring. This will, just in case for maybe climate-related reasons or political related reasons, let's say there's problems in the supply chain, nearshoring helps mitigate supply chain issues. And and lastly, AI can help with market trend forecasting, and AI is good for market trend forecasting. Now quantitative, yes. Excess, as we've mentioned, this is why it's important to do market forecasting. Excess inventory causes congestion in the supply chain. So one target we can set is Gap should aim to reduce excess inventory by 20% in the next 2 years. In 2022, Gap had an inventory turnover of 9.17. Zara and H&M, they were between 15 and 20, which means that in order to be competitive, to compete against Zara and H&M, Gap has to double their inventory turnover. And now back to the employee loss. Gap has to halt that and reverse that trend if possible, because they can't lose good workers. Now back to Sanvi. Oh no, back to me, sorry. Comparative. E-commerce. Gap does have an e-commerce presence, but they're not as competitive. They're not doing as well in e-commerce as other competitors. Their competitors offer better services. Now, divisional product differentiation that can draw new people to Gap. The young adult demographic in particular is underserved by Gap. So Gap can do more. They can make, so as an example, Gap can make sportswear and sneakers to target this particular demographic. And, I guess I'll be doing, sorry. BCG matrix. This is the BCG matrix, Boston Consulting Group matrix. This tells us what we should prioritize and what we should not prioritize. Now the question marks, the Athleta and Intermix, which focus on women's apparel and sportswear, those are the question marks. They have the potential to be big, but they still haven't figured it out. The star for Gap right now is Old Navy. They're the ones with the most growth. The cash cows are Gap and Banana Republic. That's where most of the revenue comes in from. And the dogs is Gap Kids and Baby Gap. Gap Kids and Baby Gap, for various reasons, have not really been that successful. Now I'll be passing it on to Aditya.
Thank you, Sunny. All right, let's look at the major choices Gap is facing to stay alive. First up, playing favorites. The company has realized that they can't fund every brand equally anymore. So they are placing their bets on Old Navy and Athleta, while pulling support from Gap and Banana Republic. Second, they are cutting costs and closing weak stores to protect their profits. But let's be real, that's just a short term band aid, not a long term cure. Third, they are getting way more selective about geography. For instance, they shut down all 53 of the old Navy stores in Japan. It proved that a one size fits all global approach that just doesn't work anymore. Finally, they have to figure out their digital game. They rely heavily on thousands of physical stores, but customer habits are shifting online. They need a real strategy that connects online and in store shopping. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. So what are the actual plays Gap can make right now? Option one is the survival route, keep cutting costs and closing stores. It hits the margins fast, but as the report straight up says, you can't just shrink your way to real growth forever. Option two is the rescue mission, spending a ton of money and trying to save the legacy Gap and Banana Republic brands. But honestly, their sales are already weak, and trying to fix them is super risky with absolutely no guaranteed payoff. So the real winner here is the third choice, a focused hybrid strategy. This means pouring our resources into the brands that are actually working, Old Navy and Athleta, while upgrading the online shopping experience and trimming the dead weight from the physical stores. It's realistic, practical, and it follows exactly what the numbers are telling us. And now I'll pass it on to Nabil.
Yeah, so the final recommendation slide is a little earlier. Maybe if we could go there. It was before what Aditya presented, so that I could go off of that, maybe. G- 2 slides before, I believe. One more. Yeah, so for our final recommendations, the main idea is that Gap should follow a focused hybrid strategy instead of relying on just one approach. Right now, the company is trying to manage all of its brand in the same way, but based on the analysis, it's clearly not working. So the first recommendation is to prioritize Old Navy and Athleta. And since they're already performing better and showing growth, stronger growth potential. Secondly, Gap needs to invest more into e-commerce and omni-channel retailing because they're clearly behind competitors in the online shopping experience. And finally, Gap should improve operational efficiency, especially in areas like inventory management and employee retention, instead of relying only on cost cutting. Overall, the goal is to focus on what is already working instead of trying to fix everything at once. Now, if you could go to the recommendation slide after. Key recommend implementation plans. Next one. Yeah. So to support these recommendations, we created a short-term and long-term implementation plan. In the short term, over the next 12 months, Gap could review its store performance, close weaker locations, and invest in improving its e-commerce and omni-channel systems. At the same time, they should improve inventory management and forecasting to reduce excess inventory issues. In the medium term, the focus should shift to improving internal alignments across brands and addressing employee turnover. And in the long term, Gap should focus on selective expansion, meaning they could only grow in markets where the brand actually fits. They should also continue strengthening sustainability efforts as both Sunny and Sanvi mentioned, since that is becoming the more important in the industry. So overall, the plan is structured: first stabilize, then improve, and then grow. And finally, the key takeaway, the next slide, is to conclude Gap does not need to completely reinvention, but the company already has strong brands. It needs to focus on them more clearly. By building around Old Navy and Athleta, improving digital capabilities, and making operations more efficient, Gap could create a more sustainable growth moving forward. Thank you so much for listening to our presentation, and thank you very much. Okay, I think we can stop recording.